Picture this. You're standing in a garden, but there are no flowers here, only chains. Your bare feet press against cold stone, and an iron chain runs from your wrist to a pillar. You can't sit. You can't kneel. You've been standing like this for 11 hours straight. Iron hooks are embedded deep inside both your cheeks, driven in 3 weeks ago by a man who worked with the casual precision of a carpenter hammering nails. Every time you swallow, every time you take a breath, the metal shifts beneath your skin, a constant reminder of what you become. Your skull has been shaved down to raw skin. Your forehead bears a mark in black ink, a single symbol, Ammon. In Akkadian, the ancient language of the Assyrians, it means one thing, slave. But this isn't ordinary ink. It's mixed with the ashes of your father, your brother, your uncle, ground into powder and carved permanently into your face. So you carry their death on your skin for eternity. You try to speak, to call out, to say anything at all, but what escapes your mouth isn't words. It's a twisted, gurgling sound that makes the guards laugh every single time. Because 3 weeks ago, an Assyrian surgeon removed your upper lip, not to kill you, not to silence you completely, just enough so that every sound you make for the rest of your life comes out distorted, inhuman, unrecognizable. And you're not alone in this nightmare. Along this garden stand dozens of women who share your fate. Princesses, queens, daughters of defeated kings. All chained, all marked, all transformed into something their own mothers wouldn't recognize if they saw them. Here's the worst part. They don't want you to die. They need you alive, standing right here for decades, where every ambassador, every merchant, every subject of the empire walks past you every single day. Because in the Assyrian Empire, death was considered mercy, and mercy simply didn't exist. If you're brave enough to hear the full story of Sinister empires and discover how deep this horror truly goes, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what you've heard in the last minute is just the beginning. What you just experienced wasn't some rare exception or exaggerated tale. This was standard procedure, documented in the Assyrian royal annals, translated by archaeologist Austen Henry Layard, and preserved today in the British Museum. You can literally walk in and see the evidence with your own eyes, carved in stone for eternity. The Assyrian Empire ruled Mesopotamia for over 300 years, from 911 to 609 BC. During that time, kings like Ashurnasirpal II openly bragged about what they did to their enemies, flaying generals alive, impaling prisoners on stakes outside city gates, building towering pillars constructed entirely from human skulls. Professor A. Kirk Grayson meticulously documented all of this in his work on Assyrian royal inscriptions. The Assyrians recorded every brutal act with the same cold precision a merchant would use to count grain shipments. But here's what most people don't realize, and this is where the story takes an even darker turn. All of that violence, the flaying, the impaling, the skull pillars, that was reserved for soldiers, for men captured on the battlefield. For the women, though, the queens, the princesses, the daughters of anyone who dared to defy the Assyrian throne, they designed something far worse. Because destroying a body takes only seconds. Destroying a person's entire existence while keeping them breathing and aware, that requires genius. Dark, calculating, methodical genius that would haunt these women for the rest of their lives. It started with something we take for granted today. The name in our modern world. Your name is just a label, something printed on documents and social media profiles. But in ancient Mesopotamia, your name was your soul made into sound. It was your existence acknowledged before the gods themselves. Without your name, you didn't just lose your identity in some abstract way. You ceased to exist in any spiritual sense that mattered. You became nothing, a ghost walking among the living. So when the Assyrians captured women from enemy royal families, the first thing they destroyed wasn't their bodies or even their freedom. It was their names, their very souls. Every inscription bearing the woman's name was methodically located and erased. Every clay tablet, every royal record, every carved stone, every single trace of who she had been was found and replaced with cold designations like the one who shall not be named, or simply a number on a bureaucratic ledger. In one deliberate act, her soul was erased before the gods, while her body still breathed and suffered. The tablets from the Royal Archive of Mari, discovered by French archaeologists in the 1930s, document the heartbreaking case of a princess from the kingdom of Elam. She was delivered as tribute to King Tiglath-Pileser III, and her story reveals the true depth of Assyrian cruelty. Her crime? She didn't conspire against the empire. She didn't betray anyone or commit treason. Her only crime was surviving when her city dared to rebel against Assyrian rule. The scribes recorded what happened next with the same cold, detached precision they used to catalog grain shipments and livestock. First, they systematically erased her name from every record in existence, as if she had never been born. Then they turned their attention to her body, and this is where the Assyrians revealed what they were truly capable of. They didn't beat her savagely. They didn't break her bones or leave her covered in wounds. What they did was far more calculated, far more insidious. They removed her upper lip with surgical precision, not enough to completely disfigure her face, just enough so that every word she spoke for the rest of her life came out twisted and distorted. Every sound became a grotesque parody of human speech that made anyone who heard it instinctively look away in discomfort. Think about that for just a second and let it sink in. This was a woman whose voice had once recited sacred hymns in the great temples of Elam, a voice that had been trained since childhood for beauty, for worship, for commanding the attention of rooms filled with nobility and power. The Assyrians took that exact instrument of grace and authority and methodically turned it into a weapon against her. Every syllable she uttered for the rest of her days became living proof of what had been done to her, a constant reminder that she could never escape. Every sound that escaped her lips became a living warning to anyone within earshot of what awaited those who defied the empire. Then they chained her in the palace gardens at Kalhu, modern-day Nimrud in Iraq, where ambassadors, merchants, and thousands of ordinary subjects walked past her every single day. She wasn't hidden away in some dark dungeon. She was displayed strategically, deliberately, because the Assyrians understood something absolutely terrifying about the psychology of fear. A dead enemy is mourned briefly and then forgotten within a week. But a disfigured living enemy standing in chains where everyone can see her, where her suffering is on constant display. She's remembered for generations. Her existence becomes a story that spreads across continents, a warning that echoes through time. But what happened in those gardens was just standard procedure for the Assyrian Empire. What comes next reveals what they did when they truly wanted to send a message that would echo across the ancient world. In 647 BC, King Ashurbanipal conquered Susa, the magnificent capital of the Elamite kingdom. This wasn't just another military campaign in a long list of conquests. The Elamites had defied Assyrian authority for decades, standing as one of the few powers that dared to resist, and Ashurbanipal wanted the entire ancient world to know exactly what that defiance would cost. Among the treasures and spoils of war, he captured the three sisters of the Elamite king Tumen, 3 women of pure royal blood whose legendary beauty was spoken of in hushed tones even in the distant markets of Babylon, women who represented everything noble and sacred about Elamite culture. What happened to them next is not legend passed down through whispered stories. It's not oral tradition distorted by time. It is carved in stone for eternity. The reliefs from the North Palace of Nineveh, discovered by archaeologist Hormuz Rassam in 1854, now sit in the British Museum where you can see them with your own eyes today. They are not metaphors or symbolic representations. They are documentation, cold historical records of unspeakable acts. The 3 sisters were subjected to what the cuneiform texts describe as the transformation of the divine form, a horrifying process that lasted not days, not even weeks, but months of systematic, medically supervised alteration of 3 human bodies. The goal, according to scholars who had dedicated their careers to studying these dark records, was to make them stop looking human, without ever letting them stop being alive. Think for a moment about the massive machinery required to accomplish this nightmare. Teams of physicians monitoring their vital signs, scribes meticulously documenting every stage of the process, guards working in shifts to prevent any possibility of escape or any desperate final act of defiance. skilled craftsmen forging the specialized instruments needed, an entire bureaucratic apparatus of the empire dedicated solely to prolonged, calculated suffering of 3 women. Iron hooks were embedded permanently into their cheeks, the exact same kind used in Assyrian markets to hang animal carcasses for butchering. These weren't temporary restraints that could be removed. This was permanent iron that these women would carry embedded in their faces until the day they finally died. Every meal they tried to eat, every breath they drew, every moment of restless sleep, the hooks were there, a constant physical declaration to the world that they were no longer people with dignity or rights. They were property on display, living warnings carved in flesh and metal. Their skulls were shaved completely bare every 3rd day without exception. This detail is crucial to understand. In Mesopotamian culture, a woman's hair was considered sacred, her crown of identity, her beauty, her very essence as a woman. A woman without hair existed outside the natural order of things. Neither man nor woman, a being with no proper place in the cosmos or in society. By keeping their heads perpetually shaved in this ruthless cycle, the Assyrians locked these 3 sisters in a permanent state of non-identity. They existed in a terrible void, not truly alive in any meaningful sense, but never allowed the mercy of death. Then came the tattoos, and this is a detail that has haunted scholars and historians ever since these texts were first deciphered and understood. Symbols of eternal servitude were carved deep into their foreheads with permanent black ink. But here's what makes it truly nightmarish. That ink was mixed with the ashes of their own family members who had perished in battle after Susa fell to Assyrian forces. Brothers, uncles, cousins, fathers, people they had loved and cherished, reduced to powder and pigment. Every single time these women caught their reflection in water or polished bronze, they saw their dead family members inscribed permanently on their own skin, forever marking them as property of the empire that had destroyed everything they loved. And here's the detail that separates this from anything else documented in the ancient world and reveals the true calculated evil of the Assyrian system. The empire kept these 3 women in perfect physical health. They were fed nutritious meals regularly. Their wounds were carefully treated by the empire's best physicians. They were bathed in ritual purification ceremonies because the Assyrian administration had absolutely no interest in letting them escape their fate through death or disease. The goal was decades of this existence, decades of being seen by thousands, decades of serving as breathing monuments to what happens when anyone dares to challenge Assyrian authority. If you're still watching Sinister Empires and you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, do it right now, because you're about to discover something even more disturbing. And drop a comment below and let me know what city you're watching from. I want to know how far across the world these stories are reaching. The letters of Ashurbanipal, carefully translated by Assyriologist Simo Parpala in his work, Letters from Assyrian Scholars to the Kings, reveal something chilling. The king personally consulted his royal physicians about maximizing these women's lifespan. He wanted regular reports delivered to him. He wanted to know they were still breathing, still on display in the gardens, still serving their purpose as living warnings. This was not the uncontrolled rage of some madman drunk on power. This was calculated, bureaucratic, medically supervised torture. An entire apparatus of state power dedicated to keeping 3 women alive in a condition demonstrably worse than death, because their ongoing suffering was infinitely more valuable to the empire than their corpses could ever be. Deep in the archives of the ancient city of Ashur, there exists a text that German Assyriologist Friedrich Delitzsch first translated back in 1902. For decades afterward, it was kept deliberately buried in obscure academic catalogs, hidden from public view. No full English translation was published for the general public. The reason? Scholars of the time considered the contents far too disturbing for ordinary people to read. That forbidden text described a punishment so systematic, so deliberately prolonged and calculated that scholars who studied it later gave it a specific name, Sinopai, which translates to social annihilation. This was reserved exclusively for women from royal houses who had conspired against Assyrian authority or whose families had refused to pay the imperial tribute demanded by the empire. It was not an execution in any traditional sense. It was something engineered to be infinitely worse than death, a death sentence for everything a person was, every relationship they had, every memory of who they'd been, while keeping their body breathing and aware for years. Imagine this nightmare unfolding. Day 1. You're dragged to the main square of Nineveh, right in front of the towering ziggurat temple of Ishtar, goddess of love and war. Thousands of people are watching from every direction, packed into the square. You're publicly exposed and humiliated before this massive crowd. But here's what's terrifying. The Assyrians don't strike you. They don't lay a single hand on you in violence. They understood something remarkably sophisticated about human psychology. Physical violence generates compassion in witnesses. People naturally feel pity for someone who is being beaten or tortured. The Assyrians didn't want pity from the crowd. They wanted revulsion, disgust, a visceral rejection of who you were. So instead of beating you, they cover your entire body in a specially prepared mixture of honey, cedar resin, and animal fat, a compound carefully designed to attract swarms of insects while simultaneously preserving the skin beneath from serious damage. Then they leave you exposed like this under the brutal Mesopotamian sun for 3 consecutive days and nights, while you stand there covered in insects, suffering in ways beyond description. Scribes stand nearby reading aloud in clear voices every single title you ever held, every privilege you ever enjoyed, every honor bestowed upon you, erasing each one from the official record as the silent crowd watches and internalizes what's happening. You are being unmade in front of them. After this public spectacle comes what the texts call the inversion, and this phase lasts for months. You, a former queen who once commanded armies and decided the fates of nations, are forced to perform the most degrading labor in all of Assyrian society, cleaning public latrines with your bare hands, scraping and curing animal hides in the tanneries where the stench never leaves your skin, hauling human and animal waste through the crowded streets to fertilize distant fields. All of this while wearing filthy, tattered rags deliberately dyed with cheap purple pigment, the color of royalty debased, so that every single passerby knows immediately what you once were. The rags scream to everyone who sees you. This was once a queen. Look at what she is now. Look at how far she has fallen. Imagine that existence for just a moment. A woman who once wore intricate jewelry of gold and precious lapis lazuli, who slept on beds of imported silk, who was served and protected by hundreds of attendants, now carrying buckets of waste to the streets of Nineveh, while people point and whisper, while children throw stones and shout insults, while the degrading rags on her back announce her former royal status to anyone with functioning eyes. Month after month, season after season, through scorching summers when the heat is unbearable and freezing winters when your hands crack and bleed. This continues for nearly 3 years of systematic degradation. And here's the calculated cruelty that makes this truly diabolical. The Assyrians make absolutely sure you survive it all. Medical care is provided regularly, not out of any compassion or mercy, but out of pure calculation. Your body needs to endure long enough for what comes next, because the true genius of this punishment, the part that historians and scholars have called one of the most psychologically devastating systems ever devised by human beings, came at the very end after all that suffering. After years of this nightmare existence, you're released. Your identity documents are officially returned to you. You're given a bag of food, enough grain and provisions for roughly 1 month, and you're sent out through the massive gates of Nineveh onto the open road, free, after years of unimaginable suffering. Someone from the imperial administration hands you that bag of grain, points at the horizon stretching endlessly before you, and tells you simply to walk away. You should feel overwhelming relief washing over you. You should feel joy, gratitude, hope for what comes next, but you feel absolutely nothing, just a terrible emptiness, because deep down you already know exactly what's waiting for you out there in that world. After years of public degradation, after being seen in your debased state by every citizen, every merchant, every traveler who passed to the empire's capital, no one will take you back into normal society. No village will open its doors to you. No one will give you a bed for the night. Your own blood family, the very people who should have embraced you without question, will slam the door in your face and call you contaminated, cursed, ritually unclean forever. The Assyrians didn't need prison walls or chains to imprison you anymore. They had methodically turned the entire world into your cage, and everyone in it had become your jailer. You walk for days across the barren landscape. You approach a village and see smoke rising from cooking fires. You hear children laughing and playing. You think to yourself, maybe these people don't know what happened, maybe I can start over. But they do know. Word travels faster than your exhausted feet can carry you. The purple rag still on your back announces exactly what you are before you even open your mouth to speak. And when you do finally open your mouth, that distorted sound that comes out, that twisted remnant of what was once your voice, confirms everything they've heard. The door closes in your face. Every door closes. Every single one. Many of these women ended up wandering the desert for weeks or months, walking roads with no destination, no purpose, no hope, until their bodies finally gave out from exhaustion and starvation. Others simply disappeared along remote trade routes, their bones left bleaching under the merciless Mesopotamian sun in places no one would ever find or remember. But a few, according to fragments of later Babylonian texts that survived the centuries, actually survived this ordeal. Some of these women found each other out in the wilderness. They formed hidden settlements on the outskirts of major cities, secret communities of women who had all endured the syncope together. Women without a past anyone acknowledged, without names in any official record, without families who would claim them. Women who had walked through the closest thing to a living underworld any civilization has ever created and somehow, impossibly, came out alive on the other side. Historian George Roux confirms his definitive work, Ancient Iraq, that this was not some aberration or the actions of one cruel king. This was official state policy applied systematically, bureaucratically, for centuries across the empire, because the Assyrians understood a fundamental truth about power and fear. A dead queen could become a martyr over time, a symbol of resistance, a rallying cry for future rebellions. But a queen who had been utterly broken and then rejected even by her own people, she inspired nothing in anyone but pure fear. And fear was the unshakable foundation of everything the Assyrian Empire built. In 612 BC, the great city of Nineveh finally fell to combined forces of the Medes and Babylonians. They burned the magnificent palaces to the ground, smashed the towering statues into rubble, and tried desperately to erase every trace of the Assyrian Empire from existence, to wipe it from history as if it had never been. But among the ruins, centuries later when archaeologists began their excavations, they found something the ancient destroyers had missed in their rage. Tiny clay tablets, some no larger than the palm of your hand, hidden in forgotten corners. These tablets were hidden in cracks in palace walls, carefully tucked behind loose bricks, pressed into spaces so impossibly small you'd need a flashlight to find them even today. They were written not in official Akkadian, the language of the empire and its rulers, but in Aramaic, the everyday language of common people. They were signed with symbols that linguistic experts spent years trying to decipher, mysterious marks that some scholars now believe were left by women who officially had no right to write, who officially no longer existed in any legal or social sense according to imperial records. Someone had stolen a writing tool from somewhere in the palace. Someone had waited, heart pounding, for the guards to turn away for just a moment, and someone had pressed trembling fingers into wet clay in the darkness, knowing with absolute certainty that if they were caught in the act, everything would get infinitely worse. And everything was already unbearable. Dr. Stephanie Daly of Oxford University published her groundbreaking analysis of these tablets in the Iraq Journal in 2013. They are fragments, heartbreaking pieces, sometimes just 3 or 4 lines scratched desperately into wet clay with whatever tool could be found. One tablet reads in translation, "I was once a queen, now I am no one, but this mark I carve, this will exist when the palace itself is dust." Another says simply, "They took my face, but not my eyes. I saw everything. I remember everything." And someone will read this someday. and another, barely legible after spending 2,600 years hidden in darkness. To whoever finds this, we suffered. We did not choose this. Tell our story if you can. Think about that for just a moment. A woman with no name in the official records, no freedom, no proper tools. Stealing a brief moment when no one is watching to scratch desperate lines into wet clay. Hiding it carefully in a crack in the wall, knowing she'll probably be caught eventually. Knowing these words might sit in darkness forever and never be found. But doing it anyway, despite all the risks. Because the fundamental human need to be remembered, the need to say I existed, I was here, I was a person who mattered, was stronger than the fear. It was stronger than the entire empire itself and all its terrible power. These women couldn't fight back with swords or weapons. They couldn't escape through the heavily guarded gates of the palace. So they fought with the only weapon they had left. Clay, scratches, stolen moments in the dark. They left proof of their existence hidden in the very walls of the palaces that had destroyed everything they were. And they did this knowing the risk was enormous. If caught with a stolen tool, scratching marks in the clay, the punishment would have been immediate and swift. But they did it anyway, night after night, tablet after tablet, hiding each precious one in a different crack, in a different hiding place, so that even if some were found and destroyed, others might survive the centuries and reach someone who would listen. Some of these women even found ways to subvert their punishments in small acts of defiance. The tattoos burned into their foreheads. They began to reinterpret among themselves as battle scars, as marks of survival against impossible odds. The iron chains that bound them day and night. They called them the only ornaments the king could not take from us, turning symbols of slavery into dark badges of endurance. They took the language of the empire that had destroyed them and reshaped it into an alphabet of their own survival. Professor Mario Liverani argues in his work, Assyria, the Imperial Mission, that these hidden testimonies represent one of the earliest documented acts of female resistance in all of human history. Not military resistance, not political rebellion, but something even more fundamental, existential resistance, the absolute refusal to be erased from history, no matter what was done to them. Now here's what I want you to think about. 2,600 years have passed since these women lived and suffered. The names of Assyrian kings like Ashurbanipal are studied in universities around the world. Their military conquests fill history textbooks. Their palace walls sit behind protected museum glass, where tourists take selfies every single day. But the women who endured their worst punishments, who suffered things we can barely comprehend, remain nameless in those same history books. Their bones lie scattered in unmarked graves beneath the Iraqi desert. No statues commemorate them. No monuments bear their names. They were designed, with the full power of the most feared empire on earth behind that design, to be completely forgotten. And yet here you are, right now, listening to their story, remembering them, giving voice to women whose mouths were surgically disfigured so they could never speak clearly again. You just did something that the most powerful empire in the ancient world spent centuries and countless resources trying to prevent. You heard them. You listened to voices that were supposed to be silenced forever. The Assyrians carved their glory into stone they believed would last for eternity. All of that is dust now, ruins in the desert. But those tiny tablets hidden in cracks, scratched by the trembling hands of women who had supposedly ceased to exist, those survived against all odds. Those still speak to us across the centuries. Power can destroy bodies. It can erase names from official records. It can turn human beings into living warnings. But it could never, not even with all the empire's might, destroy the will to leave a mark, to whisper across 2,600 years. I was here. I mattered. And the empire did not have the last word. And maybe that's the real lesson from sinister empires that we need to understand today. Empires rise up claiming eternal glory. They conquer nations. They build monuments to themselves that touch the sky. They think they're permanent. They think their power is the final word on everything. It never is. The final word always belongs to the ones who refuse to be silent, even when silence would be easier, even when speaking costs everything. Those women carved their truth into clay with bleeding fingers, hoping desperately that someone, somewhere, someday would find it. You found it. Now it's your turn to carry it forward. Tell me in the comments below. Did you know any of this before watching? Where are you watching from? Drop your city name in the comments, because every single comment is another voice saying across time, we heard you, we remember you, you mattered, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button right now. Not for me, for them. Every subscription keeps these voices alive for one more person who needs to hear them, who needs to know that resistance against impossible odds is possible. Like this video, if these stories matter to you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. On your screen right now, more stories are waiting to be told. Forgotten voices calling out from history. Hidden truths that powerful people try to bury. The darkest corners of the ancient world where light needs to shine. I'll see you in the next episode of Sinister Empires.